The results of the studies reported in empirical articles obviously contribute to our knowledge about the variables in the study. Understanding research design and applying logic also helps us to apply the results to increase our knowledge about related variables. The 3 articles we've used as examples for applying the concepts also provide helpful examples for thinking about how the results add to our knowledge. You might want to pause this recording to review your notes about those articles before moving on. When we think about what we know by simply paraphrasing the results of a study, we're directly applying those results to expand our knowledge. To do so accurately, we need to remember that the research design influences how we can think about the results, though. If the design is non-experimental, we know about how the variables are related or are associated, but not if changes in one variable cause changes in another variable. If we think about the direct application of the results from the Burton and King study, then, we can start by noting that it was an experiment, and then review the summary of the results. When we think or write about what we know from the results, we could say something along the lines of, writing about positive experiences may increase positive mood and reduce the chances a person will get sick. The phrase may increase and reduce suggest cause and effect, which is okay since this was an experimental study. So when we're writing about what we know about a topic and paraphrase the results of a study, we're directly applying those results. But we're going to be writing about stress. How would information about positive experiences, mood, and health fit with what we know about stress? That's where the idea about applying logic comes in. Using induction and deduction, or other forms of logic, also helps us increase our knowledge based on the results of the studies. This form of knowledge is more tentative, though, because it's not directly supported by the results. When we learn about citations, you'll see we give the original authors credit in a different way when we make logical extensions based on their findings. That helps the reader know that part of the idea is really ours, but it's supported by findings from the study in the cited article. It's a good rule of thumb to focus on one part of the research design when making a logical extension. When we think this way, we're really speculating about how we think the results of the study relate to other variables or to other populations. But if we speculate too much, we're really just coming up with ideas that aren't supported by the results. That said, you might remember that other descriptions of deductive reasoning say that it results in predictions rather than in knowledge. In this context, I talk about it as a way of thinking about what we know based on the results of the article. And we have to know something to make a prediction. Thinking about it as knowledge can also make it easier to think about how we can write about it in a lit review for a research proposal or for a research report. Okay, now that I've explained what I mean by a logical extension, an example would probably be really helpful. Thinking about the variables and the results of the Burton and King study from that perspective can lead to a number of conclusions about how it adds to our knowledge. It might also clarify something else you've been wondering about. How does this relate to our interest in stress? It's important to keep in mind that logical extensions still have their basis in the findings of the primary source, so the design of the study still influences how we can talk about the variables. We still can't use a non-experimental study to make a statement about causation. Given that the basis is in the primary source, we use a citation to provide evidence that the idea is supported by research. We'll learn about formatting those citations later. When we think about findings from this perspective, it can also help us understand why we need to look at primary sources, since it helps us realize the different way a writer might be applying the findings of a study. The results of the study in the Hearst article can be directly applied in a number of ways. The example I included in this slide is one approach, but you could also make a statement about the number of specific sources, the fact that each of those has multiple components, or about the common sources of stress, just to name a few. Thinking about it from those perspectives might also help you think about how the findings could be applied to understand people in general. That's the approach I took in the logical extension in this slide. The example is writing about the same variables from the results, but in a way that can be applied to a different population. Now that you've seen a couple of examples, it might be helpful to pause the recording and practice thinking about the direct application of the findings from the study in the Schiffrin and Nelson article and about the logical extension of those findings. There isn't one right answer when we think about what we know based on the results of the study. While we need to make sure our wording accurately represents the research design, even the direct application of the findings can vary because we can emphasize different things. Your notes could be different than the examples in this slide, then. As long as they don't suggest causation, you're probably on the right track. The discussion sections of the article often provide examples of the logical extension of the findings, such as the idea from Schiffrin and Nelson that I quoted in this slide. The sentence below that quote is another example of how we can extend the findings from the study reported in Schiffrin and Nelson. When we consider how the results of the studies reported in an empirical article add to our knowledge, it can be helpful to think about how we would write about what we know. We can generally write about it in two ways: by directly stating about the results, also known as paraphrasing, or by presenting a logical extension. Logical extensions apply the results to think about different variables or another population, but still need to be presented in a way that's consistent with the research design. When we present a logical extension in a literature review, we use a citation to signal that the idea is supported by another published source. I emphasized only making logical extensions about a variable or about the population. Between that and the need to accurately convey the design and the findings of the study, it might seem like it's pretty hard to add new ideas to what we already know. The good news is, APA style doesn't require a citation for every sentence. We can include additional logical extensions, interpretations, or information about implications, as long as it's clear that it's related to evidence from another source. In other words, we need to start with what we know from other sources, but we can build on that.